UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jenn Durrell.
Hey, baby.
Hey, baby.
It is good to be back on Talking Weird after us both having been so busy for the last few weeks, and with show-related things, I might say. We weren't really slacking off. For example, you have kicked off a brand new video show called Haunted Jenn. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Haunted Jenn. Well, it's mainly about my personal experiences, and I'll be going on investigations as well. And I'm sure I'm going to ask people about their experiences as well. The subtitle is Searching for Answers. So the whole point is for people to come along with me and see if we can find answer to all of our questions that has anything to do with the paranormal.
I think it's a great show and it's a great idea. And I loved the first episode, and I'm looking forward to watching as it continues to grow and evolve. Mm-hmm. And while you were busy doing that, I was busy building charlesfort.org, the new internet hub for your show Haunted Jenn, for Talking Weird, for my YouTube show Fort Thoughts, along with some other fun, weird Fortean goodness. And there's also a t-shirt store on there with over 25 t-shirt designs of all things UFO and encrypted and paranormal in men's and women's sizes. And I'm pretty happy with the original designs we have up there. And I know you are, because you've already started wearing a few of the shirts. Can you tell us what your favorite design is in the store?
Well, I like the Charles Fort shirt for sure. But I also enjoy the introvert that's got the Bigfoot Sasquatch on it. And I love the Mothman shirt.
There's so many good things there. I'd encourage anybody who likes, this is a bit of a shameless plug, but it does help the show. I consider anybody who's into a paranormal or UFO clothing to check it out, because I'm pretty sure you'll dig it. Anyway, let's get on to the real meat of the show this week. I'm so excited about the guest we have this week. She's an author, publisher, and the acclaimed host of the popular Into the Fray podcast. Folks might also know her as the host from 2 Small Town Monsters series, On the Trail of Bigfoot and On the Trail of UFOs. Her latest book, co-authored with best-selling author G. Michael Hopf, is the mind-bending and chilling Beyond the Fray, Paramalgamation. And actually, we've been wanting to have her on Talking Weird since we started the show. So I'm delighted to finally welcome Shannon LeGro. You know, that's one of the reasons I was looking so forward to having you on the podcast. You've been somebody that Jenn and I have talked about getting on since we started it, because you seem to, be very personable and fascinating, and somebody who's a great conversationalist. So it's awesome that you could join us tonight.
Well, thank you guys. No, I appreciate the invitation very much.
I think I first really got a handle on who you were and your research skills and the like, funnily enough, in the Small Town Monster documentaries, because we played On the Trail of Bigfoot. Seth Breedlove very kindly cut together a long feature version of that series for us to screen at Midwest Weird Fest, which is a film festival that I run in Eau Claire a couple of years ago. And earlier this year we did On the Trail of UFOs, which was fantastic as well. How did you first get in contact with Seth and do that collaboration?
Actually, it's a funny story, because we had been talking online about various things. It was most likely Facebook, but we actually met in person at a recording for one of the Finding Bigfoot town hall meetings while I lived in Ohio. So that was the first time I actually met him in person. I don't even know exactly what year that was, but that was years ago. And, ever since then, we had talked about doing projects together, and now we're finally able to do that. So it's really exciting. Yeah, he's a very good friend, as you know, really hard worker. And he's just really, he's diving headlong into what he really wants to do, which is so cool.
I love it how in both the series that you're involved with him, as well as all of the small town monster films, that they don't take that very exploitative kind of angle, which is traditional for most paranormal themed television today. It approaches the subject very seriously and doesn't rely on all of these kind of crazy cliffhanger moments and the like to actually tell the story. So yeah, they're very impressive films.
Yeah, I think we get kind of used to that in watching a lot of the TV shows and the documentaries. While a lot of them are really well done, as you said, they have a certain flavor to them and a certain way that they like to do things, and that's totally fine. But I do like Seth's approach to things.
Oh yeah, I do too. And I like your approach to your new book, Beyond the Fray, Paramalgamation. So I think we should probably jump into that. I have some more analytical stuff to go over with you after we've talked about some of the stories, but I thought maybe we could jump into one of my favorite tales in that book to begin with, and that's the account by a witness called Chris, which the chapter is The Boulders, and it's about a rather strange and frightening experience that somebody had walking late at night past a boulder field. Could you fill us in a little bit about that story?
Absolutely. And I love that you chose this one because this is also one of my tops as far as a real head scratcher. Because as everyone will find out very quickly, you think maybe you have your finger on the pulse of what this might be. And then the phenomena, or whatever it is, it changes. And you're like, oh, well, shoot, I didn't have that at all. So Chris came on actually a few different times, and some of it is for insiders, and some of it, like this boulder story, I felt was really important to air for everybody because we really wanted to get it out there to see if anyone else had any experiences like this. So Chris is in his early 20s at this point, and he says his family is under really heavy financial stress, and and his father had actually gotten in a pretty heavy argument, and that was in no way resolved. And he remembers that he left his truck at his grandma's house, who only lived a few miles away, and figuring, okay, well, I need to kind of chill out from the argument. I may as well go get my truck. So that's what he decides to do. And he said it was a really dark, clear night, and it took some time for his eyes to adjust to be able to see well. And, he could walk confidently, but he couldn't really see too far past where he was in front of him. That's how dark it was. And to his right is a very large boulder field. And just to interject here really quickly, a lot of people indoctrinated in maybe some of the missing 411 stuff might be going already like, oh, a boulder field. Interesting. So I'm just going to throw that out there, because I know that people will go, is she going to mention the 411? And I will. I did.
We were just talking about that before the show, funnily enough, as well.
Oh my goodness. Did you guys, not to get off track here, but did you guys watch The Hunted on, is it Prime? I think it's on Prime.
It's my favorite of his two documentaries so far.
Yeah. I got to say that the first one was really hard to watch, especially as a parent. When the guy is holding the skull cap of his son, I believe, I got a little waterworks on that one. That was really tough to watch that because no matter what's at the base of the phenomena, there's people still missing their loved ones. So
it's horrible.
But the Hunted was like total. Not that wasn't sad. It's just the first one seemed to have a lot more visuals that really kind of tugged at your heart. But the Hunted had some incredible stuff in it. How did you? Sorry, I'm switching the role here. How did you guys feel about him putting in the section with Ron Moorhead and the Sierra Sounds, and then the story with Jan Maccabee with the Predator case? How did you guys feel about him adding that into that documentary?
The Maccabee stuff, to start with, is fascinating. Again and again, I'm seeing in books which include multiple different stories similar to your Paramalgamation, or whether it's a Linda Godfrey book or whether it's something from Lon Strickler, or even if it's just reading a paranormal news site or a site with various encounters. There are so many similar reports to what Bruce Maccabee's wife experienced regarding a predator-type shimmer effect of something in the trees. This thing, it seems to be becoming a more prevalent phenomenon, and it certainly does give a hint at maybe there's something like that which is taking people to the point that obviously is why David includes it in his books and in his documentary.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of people probably had a hard time with that or a full-on reaction to him including Bigfoot, and or the paranormal aspect with the Predator case, which obviously that's what that was. It's just paranormal, meaning we don't know what the heck it is, so it's paranormal, it's abnormal. But I respected him for putting that stuff in there. I really did, because I think that we can't just look at one thing for any of this stuff. Like, it has to be either it's maybe one thing pretending to be all these things, or it's just a whole bunch of different stuff kind of coming out at us in different places, whether those places are more apt to have activity or not. I just think there's too many factors to take into account and say, oh yes, well, it's all, we know that's all people, or no, that's all cougars, or that it cannot be. It just cannot be that.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, please do jump in like that, because
I'm the worst with that stuff. I apologize.
No, you're so insightful, Shannon. And one of the things that I love about you is you're happy to throw around different ideas and different theories, I think. And now I'm off track, but that's okay. Let's just go wherever this takes us. One of my big critiques of the broader Fortean community, for lack of a better term these days, is people have looked at Charles Fort and taken one aspect of what he did, which was collate and collect stories of strange, anomalous goings on. But Fort was, he was a big critic of science and the scientific methodology and how it was failing paranormal investigation. But also he was happy to throw around broader ideas which suggested maybe an umbrella to explain things disappearing, for example, or people reappearing, or...
Yeah.
And the greatest Fortean since Charles Fort was, of course, John Keel, who did exactly what you're talking about doing. And that is that he was very adroit at looking at various what seemed to be unrelated paranormal or anomalous phenomena, and then being able to say, hang on, this demonological apparition over here seems very much like this UFO report, which seems very much like this Bigfoot report, and then start to at least weave ideas that might cover how these things are similar, that maybe there is some root cause phenomenon that all of this other seemingly unrelated phenomena is actually just a manifestation of. So that's something I wanted to get into the interview with you. And it looks like we already are.
And you're like, and I wanted to do that at the end, but okay. I'm sorry. No, it's funny because we're already talking about things like a sheer, shimmery entity in a tree, whatever that thing is. And then, like myself, I've seen shadow people. But guess what? I've only seen that one time when I was 12. Just the one time. And yes, I've had other strange experiences, but like that was my big, like, haha, it's never happened again. But yet I talk to people, and I know you guys do too, that have weekly, monthly, yearly, whatever it is, however many experiences. What is the difference there? What's the breaking point to why are they having, like, I ask people that, I'm like, why do you feel like you can't sleep every night because someone's tugging on your toes or whatever the situation is, Like, and by the way, I think that's the worst situation to be in is activity in your home. But it's such a rabbit hole, and what a terrible term to use, but it really is. And it just keeps going down, 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 down. And like, oh, this is so random. But I wanted to ask you guys, actually, if you've heard of this. I went yesterday, a rabbit hole I went down was this whole Randonautica thing. Have you heard of this?
I don't think so.
I don't know if I have. Fill us in though, please.
I wish that I hadn't got started on it. Well, maybe I do. But so it's this app, and it's actually really, I mean, for lack of a better term, it's kind of a janky little app. It looks really simply written, but it's got this logo that's looks like an owl with his like neck broken and his head just hanging down, which is already kind of creepy and gives you that like vibe of, maybe Bohemian Grove or something, who knows.
Right.
But you open the app and you're supposed to, you hit the GPS, it locates you, and then you think of an intent. Like you can think death, you can think money or happiness or mystery or whatever it is. So it's claiming to be based upon basically quantum mechanics and physics and being tied to the earth and all this other stuff. You go to the point and it's supposed to be interacting with whatever your intent was. At first I thought, okay, this is kind of silly. But I started, now first of all, these are YouTube videos, so you have to be very mindful because people have subscribers to satiate, right?
Yes.
But I mean, some of the stuff that I've been seeing is on like mainstream news. And in fact, some teenagers in Seattle were using Randonautica. And the point that Randonautica took them to was a suitcase on the beach, on Alki Beach, which, as most will know, is across the water from quote unquote mainland Seattle, a very affluent area. They go down, they open the suitcase little, it smells horrible. They call the cops. There are 2 dismembered human bodies inside this suitcase.
Goodness.
And they claim, no way to prove this, but they claim that their intent was death, before they picked the point and, they hit the let's go to the point. They said that their intent was, anyway, that was the rabbit hole I went down. So, but does that also play into what we were talking about as far as, Keel and being tied into our universe and, who gets what and who doesn't see anything and they're just skeptical and poo-poo this stuff all their lives. And being skeptical is really important, and you have to keep that no matter what you've seen. But the hardcore skeptics, the skeptics as they call them, are really they are tough to talk to, of course, because until they have that experience that they need, but their brown pants for, they won't be changing their tune.
Right.
And I don't even know if a lot of those folks would change their tune or even admit it if something happened to them, So anyway, that was a huge digression. I totally apologize, but that was something that, I've been looking into. And I honestly got a little creeped out by reading some of these accounts of this whole Randonautica thing, because at the base of it is people, and people can be scarier than any paranormal thing that a lot of us cover on the show. And, you're sharing your GPS location. So at the base of it, it could just be people following you around, because that's one of the things with the app. Well, who wants people following them around? I sure don't. So I don't know.
I think that ties into what we were talking about. Actually, I've recently started a little side project, which is this 5-minute an episode web series called Forethought. And what I'm looking at in that show at the moment is Jacques Vallée's hypothetical model that suggests paranormal experiences are akin to sitting in a darkened cinema. So just like when you're in a cinema and staring at the image projected on the screen in front of you, you're not actually seeing the real technology or mechanism that's responsible for the image that you're transfixed by. The reality is behind you in the projection booth. And perhaps when one sees a UFO or a Virgin Mary apparition or a Bigfoot or whatever, they're only seeing what some other intelligence wants them to see. They're not seeing the root cause of the manifestation itself. So at the moment in Forethought, in each episode, I'm looking at a different possibility of what could be driving that hypothetical projector. And in 2 of the upcoming episodes, the possible interpretations that I put forward both tie into that weird app that you just mentioned, insofar as maybe reality is very different to how we have been taught to understand it. One of the ways, of course, could be something that Elon Musk, for example, has talked about, and anybody who's seen a Matrix movie is aware of, or anybody who's ever read Rene Descartes is aware of, the idea that maybe this reality isn't a physical reality the way we think that it might be. Maybe we're not even at base reality. Maybe there's a sophisticated evil demon, as Descartes said, playing tricks on us, and we don't even have a physical form. Or maybe we're trapped in the 10th or 100th or 1,000th level of an ongoing matrix simulation, and none of this is real.
Yeah.
And that to me would explain why sometimes people say a glitch in the matrix. I'm not even sure if it's a glitch. It could be a part of the program of the matrix to throw weird, strange things out that we weren't expecting, and to see how we respond.
Just to see how we'd react. Yeah. Yeah.
Alternatively, another thing, of course, is a book that was very popular in, I don't know, it was when I was doing my PhD in New Age circles in the late 90s, is a book by Michael Talbot called The Holographic Universe. And he talks quite extensively about theories put forward by very respectable psychiatrists and very respectable physicists about how the human brain seems to, and I won't go into it, we'd be talking about it all day, but I'll cover it quickly, how the human brain seems to act like a hologram, and how the universe also seems to act like a hologram. And this is when we start talking about entanglements and things like that, it behaves very differently to this disunified reality that we think everything is. And this is a problem with, I think, a lot of Fortean research. I'm not sure, and I'm not taking a shot at anybody, and I normally don't talk like this on the show, but I have you who gets it, so I can. I understand how somebody back in the 1960s who was just a UFO researcher always looked for an extraterrestrial interpretation, and somebody who was just a Bigfoot researcher thought they were hairy hominids or some great ape, hiding in the Pacific Northwest, or somebody who was just a specter hunter thought it was all just ghosts or demons or whatever. But now when you have this new type of Fortean that collects all of these stories or talks about all of these different types of apparitions and phenomena and the like, yet they still look at these things all separately. Okay, there's Bigfoot over here, it's a hairy man, and over here there's aliens visiting us from Zeta Reticula, and over here there's the spirit of dear departed granny visiting. Yet many of these modern day Forteans fail to even try to put these pieces together and realize that maybe, just as Fort had said almost a century ago, that there's a oneness to all things, or like Keel suggested, there's only one phenomenon and all of these different apparitions and cryptids and spacemen are just different manifestations of that same root phenomenon. For starters, it's such a more elegant theory, and secondly, it's a far better fit for the evidence. Or more to the point, it's a better fit for there being a lack of any real physical evidence for any of these things. And yet there are still so many people that keep talking about finding a Sasquatch body or dreaming of the government coming forward with UFO disclosure regarding extraterrestrial visitation or capturing undeniable footage or audio recordings of the dead. And none of this has changed in over 60 years, but these people keep marching down the same endless path.
Right. No, and I don't know about you guys, but it's frustrating to think that it is a kind of the Keelian way. Like they can take on whatever form they want, right? So are we ever going to gain any traction in solving any of this? And if that's the case, I really don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
Keel is so cool because he was so both sides of the coin, because he was very much like, I mean, they're pranksters. They're here. They're taking on all these forms. But at the same time, he's like, well, yeah, but it's also us, and how we interact with things. And like I said, the psychological factors in it, which we can't discount, of course. But I don't know. I mean, how does that apply to like my sighting at 12? I'm not quite sure how exactly applies to that. How do I separate that? And can I? I mean, I know what I saw, but maybe it was just in my mind, like Keel has said in the past. So I don't know what to think about that stuff.
I don't know if Jen mentioned to you at all that she's had a number of strange experiences across a couple of different phenomena anyway.
I did not know that. You should come on ITF sometime. I would love to have you.
You're talking about people that don't have experiences, people that seem to always have them, or they just have it once. I'm the one that always has them. So it's something I'm really interested in, researching and learning more about.
See, and hearing me, just because all I can really swing back to, I mean, really, truly, like I said, I've had other interesting experiences, especially in the quote unquote Bigfoot realm. I've never seen one, but I've had interesting auditory experiences with possible Sasquatch. But I mean, would you rather be like in my camp where you just had the one experience, because that was enough for me to catapult me into being I'm flying my freak flag high and I'm, proud to be in this camp. Or are you feeling like, no, it's cool that I've had that many experiences?
When I was younger, it was cool. The older I get, the more I'm, wanting to get to the meat of it and figure out what exactly it is. Yeah.
And you're having stuff going on in your house at all? Like,
not too much in my house lately. No, I do a lot of investigations lately. But when I was younger and just here and there, I'll get little things and I'll know when something's here. I usually can feel it. So all I have to do is set up something, a flashlight, voice recorder, or any of the equipment that I have. And I tend to get something each time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they're just, I mean, for the most part, they just seem pretty quiet.
Just kind of hanging out. Like one, I actually have videotaped where I had asked who it was. Like, are you a family member? Why are you here? And didn't really get much. What I figured was, no, it wasn't a family member. So then I started asking more questions. So I live next to a hospital. So I said, well, are you from the hospital? Did you happen to come down this direction and just, decided to peek in? I mean, I don't know. What I came from that was I got several notifications that it was like a yes. The flashlight would turn on like, yeah, that's the direction I need to keep asking questions. And so I asked more questions if they had passed away, yes. And I've got it all written down, but it was very interesting because my kids were involved in it. So they were asking questions too. So that's another thing I didn't used to keep my kids involved in it. And now it's something I can't hide from them. So they're completely aware of it.
And they're not freaked out.
No, my son enjoys it. He actually, when he visits his dad, because we always had a lot of light play out at the farm. We used to see lights. I used to see lights just walking around at the farm, and I've seen them up in the sky too. And he saw some lights up in the sky, and he sends me this video, and he's like, "Mom, look what I caught." And it's these crazy lights, and I'm like, well, where are you seeing this? And he's like, I'm just looking up. It's outside the window, and he told me where it was at, and so I sent it to his dad, and I'm like, did you see this? And he goes, no, he didn't tell me about it. And I'm like, okay, well,
he's getting real used to stuff.
And he has seen stuff when he hasn't recorded these lights that are in the sky. And some of them are blue. So, yeah, he's pretty aware of it.
I should get back to your book, though, which we were meant to be talking about, because I think
it's my
listen, I'll go down the Fortean, Keelian, as you were saying before, weird rabbit hole for the next 4 hours. So
Well, that's the worst thing to do to the listeners, because they're like, we actually probably would like to hear stories, and she started it, and then she took it off track. It was totally my fault. So I
was enjoying it. But we were talking about the boulder story. I think we went off the track when we both agreed that it had similarities to what David Paredes talks about. When we left the story, Chris was walking towards his truck, and he was just starting to walk past the boulder field.
Yeah. So let's get back on track here. To Chris's right, he sees a large boulder field, and see now you can get the flashy thing like Men in Black, like it never happened. That 20 minutes is right back where we started. So, okay. So he sees the boulder field, and this was one that is associated with an old rock quarry that paralleled the road actually for quite a good distance. And he ends up hearing a moan coming from just above the boulder field, and that's how he described that. It might sound strange, but I wrote it exactly how, he had described it. And that's how he described it, above the boulder field. So take that as you will. So he figures at this point it's a coyote. He keeps going. There's a second moan that sounds, but nowhere near where the first one was. And then immediately after that comes a third, a fourth, and a fifth. And these are all from different places behind him. He says the sounds begin to converge together as if they were calling to one another, basically. And he could now tell that they were all together and actually heading towards him from behind, unfortunately. So he is now rightfully quite frightened. He cannot see them, but he knows they're coming closer. And then when they get about, he says, maybe 30 feet from him, everything goes silent except for the patter of feet or paws on the gravel road. And he can tell that they've formed basically a semicircle about 20 feet from him. And here's where it starts to get a little weird. You're like, okay, maybe I got this figured out. Guess what? We don't. There is a clicking that starts between them. He said it reminds him basically of the sounds that the Bushmen made from the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy. So one would click, then another one a few seconds later, and back and forth they go just like that. And now he knows for sure these are not coyotes. So he's still trying to move down the road as quickly as possible and also trying to see what may be behind him, but it was just far too dark. So as if the communication going on behind him wasn't frightening enough, something else starts. He starts to feel extremely drowsy. So again, another weird thing gets piled onto this. And he told me, as odd as this sounds, with being in possible, really true danger, not knowing what's stalking him, he was intensely fatigued. And he looks to his right and barely sees in the middle of this boulder field a massive one near the center of it. So he has this plan hatched that he needs to get to it and climb atop it. So at least he can kind of have a bird's eye view of what might be going on here. So he does this and he sits down on the boulder, and he's happy because there's no sagebrush around, so it gives him a good point of view. And his fatigue is growing, and now the clicking has stopped. So he's kind of like going, this is almost even worse because I can't hear anything. He actually ends up slumping over on his left side, and he falls fast asleep. Again, very strange. So he doesn't know how long he's out for, but he's awakened to something touching the back of his head. And he jumps up to find it's still dark and only able to hear the patter again of what sounded like bare feet running away from him. And now, of course, he's got adrenaline rushing through him, and he gets off the boulder, makes his way back to the road. And not a minute later, the clicking begins again. And to me, honestly, guys, the clicking between that and he's labeling it now bare feet is extremely creepy. Like I put this is on the no list for me, this story, to be honest with you. Like 100% no list. No
Yeah.
thanks. So they were everywhere at this point again, but in front of him. He's back on the road. He's trying to make his way, and another wave of fatigue hits him. But he's extremely determined this time not to stop because it's not good what's going on, whatever it is. And he's so confused about the feeling, this feeling of being tired with something unknown, whoever or whatever stalking him. And he says he's almost feeling like he's drugged. Like it's very scary. And it's like he had no control whatsoever over his body. So he's actually stumbling now. And he tells me that even maybe nearly falling numerous times. And he's disoriented to the point where he admitted that if he didn't focus as hard as he did, he could have walked off into the river or back into the boulder field or been going just plain the wrong way. So that swings back to him saying like he felt drugged. So he doesn't remember if he, like physically trips or actually hit a rock or something, but now he falls to the ground. He's full on fallen. And he starts to crawl with the need to get away, still there. He's like, I know I'm in danger. I got to get out of here. And he finds that even hard to do. He's crawling. And that's pretty dramatic when you think about it, right? Like you feel like something's following you and you're crawling. So he sits up on his knees and he spots another boulder and decides again, okay, well, let me try to get to that boulder. And he makes what he said at that time was like a climb up Everest to get up this thing because he's still so tired. And for the second time, he passes out. He goes to sleep. And he wakes up flat on his back to see the star-filled sky and hears a grunt sound above where his head was, followed by a similar sound down by his feet. And then he hears movement off to his left. So, he's still frightened, but he has no strength to move at this point. So before he passes out yet again, guys, he thinks, I'm surrounded. He's got one up at his head, one down by his feet, and then hears something off to his left. He's like, I'm surrounded. Passes out again. So he finally wakes up this last time, and the sun is rising. He sits up, he looks around, but he sees nothing. He checks his body. There's no marks, no wounds anywhere, and the feeling of being tired is totally gone. So he makes his way to his grandma's house. He gets his truck and he drives home. And, that was the first and last time he had an experience like that. He has no clue who or what was stalking him that night and what caused, of course, the overwhelming fatigue that took over him. And he does admit, though, because people have asked, they're like, well, I mean, does Chris think that could be Bigfoot related? And he admits that he really doesn't think that was Bigfoot related. He has no clue what it is. He's like, it's out there, but it could be a fae or something like this, something more of the, elemental, paranormal nature. But he really, truly feels that was not Bigfoot related. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about that one.
Yeah, there's an awful lot to unpack in that story. I think we already talked about the obvious David Paulides missing 411 narrative and the boulder field, and I would suggest the disorientation, and we don't know what happens to these people in the stories that Paulides collects, but who knows if something like that happens. There was something in the storytelling which had almost a mythic feeling in the believability of it. You know, it's like, it
Right.
hit me when I read it. That's why I suggested it as the first one that I really wanted to talk about. It almost hit at a mythic level. And it makes me think, when you mentioned phase and the like, I'm not sure what's behind those things. And like I mentioned before, I very much take a Keelian or a Verlaine kind of perspective, where I think a lot of this is interrelated. But it certainly echoes a lot of tales from fairy lore and from popular stories based on fairy lore. I mean, think how many fairy tales there are based on sleep paralysis and sleep disorders, and even Rip Van Winkle is an example. So there's something about what happens not only when we enter sleep voluntarily, but perhaps there is something out there that can initiate us to enter sleep, which is certainly not unique to this story. And that's what gives it that broader
Yeah.
power, I think.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to hear Chris tell that story himself, of course, it's episode 143 on Into the Fray. But you know, when you talk to folks that have experiences like this, and I know that you guys know, you can hear, especially if they haven't told it a whole bunch of times and they're not indoctrinated, like maybe, all of us are in talking about our own experiences, that it punches them in the gut when they're spitting it out to you. It has nothing to do with, because I don't do a live show either. I do pre-record. I prefer that. So, but even just talking to me, you can hear it in their voice that they haven't spoken this either ever or to very, very, very few people. And I don't know what to make of this one, but there was another lady, Pam, that came on, and her specific thing was Faye. I've had her on 3 or 4 times, and she had an experience, and one of many. She has them basically right outside of her door, and that's a story for another time. But she had been in Ireland with her friend, and long story short, they end up basically in one of these, maybe what Keel would call what does he call them?
Window area, or
The window area, yeah. And it was, like this tunnel kind of a situation, and they were in the forest. Okay, so we hear this a lot, and again, missing 411, who knows? And they go down this tunnel, not willingly, and Pam actually ends up losing her sight for a short time, and they are trying to get out of this tunnel. But whatever this force is, they're going in, and by the time they make it out, they felt like they barely made it out of that thing, but they were fighting it and they got out, obviously. But she had physical effects from that incident. So what is that? What could you call that? Can you label that Faye? Can you label that just, oh, well, that's just a spirit elemental, part of the earth. Okay, well, then what is a Faye, or what is a ghost, or, I don't know what to make of this stuff. But some of those kind of stories that are very difficult to label, you can't stamp it Bigfoot or whatever it is, like this story, the boulders, those are some of my favorites. They're so out there. You're just going, hey, I'm at a loss, because I'm certainly no expert, and there's no experts, period. So
Right.
you just scratch your head and go, ooh, that's a weird one. I mean, that's just like, and I encourage everybody to go listen to this one too. This is one I love to talk about, and that is the Robert episode. I still don't know what to make of that one. It's just so strange. And that's another story of coming across something or someone that you just weren't expecting, and your whole life changes. What you thought was normal no, there's other things out there for sure.
I was going to ask you about that one as well. Do you want to just cover that one briefly? That's a spooky and a fascinating tale that taps into another strong mythological tradition with one of the possible interpretations.
Yeah, and this one really got to me because I'm not a big, and this may really annoy people, but I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the EVP stuff, just because it's so suggestive. Just like if you watch Ghost Adventure and he's like, Zach's like, it says this. Or, well, they could have put something else up there and he said, it says this, and you'd hear that too.
Yeah.
So it's very suggestive. I'm not saying it's not cool, but this was the first time for me, and I'll get into the story, but this was the first time for me that after airing it, someone goes, not just someone, several people wrote in and go, you have to go to, it was like time marker 3822 or something. You got to go there and listen to this. And there was a whisper and then talking behind me. And anyway, let me tell the story so I don't ruin anything. But yeah, that was the first time I'm like, whoa, that's a cool one.
Yeah.
So This is we're going to spring break in Florida. Much more laid back spring break than this year in Florida, by the way. So it's a group of kids from Indiana, and they go to Panama City they're just party. They want to hang out at the beach. So they're admittedly low on funds, so they find this cheap hotel in a slightly bad part of town. And their first night there, they get a knock on the door, and there's a smiley, friendly, very well spoken guy and about their age, and he asks them, "Hey, you wanna hang out? You wanna party?" And of course, they're like, "Of course, the more the merrier. Why not?" And Nick is the one that came on and talked to me, and this is episode 158 for anyone that wants to listen to it. But right away, Nick, he senses something is really off about this person who is named Robert. And this is the very first night, and this is hours later. They're playing cards, and Robert looks over, and within the span of 5 seconds, Robert's entire face changes, morphs. I mean, completely. Everything about it. Bone structure shifts, hairline recedes, the hair grows shorter, and then goes from a lighter color to a darker one, and even his eye color changed. And of course, he's shocked, to say the least. And Robert is just sitting there smirking, like he knows. He knows exactly what Nick is seeing.
Yeah.
And not wanting to freak out in front of his friends, Nick gets up and he goes outside to process everything. And of course, he's wondering if any of his other friends saw this, but no one reacted if they had. So the next day at the beach, a female friend comes up and says, "Robert said that he made his face change for you too." And Nick said he was so uncomfortable by what she said. And, he regrets this, of course, but he just walked away. He didn't press her for any more information or anything. So something else that is extremely strange about Robert, and I think Nick admits that he doesn't know if he was actually asleep, and you'll understand what I mean here very shortly, but he assumed that Robert was asleep. So he goes through some of Robert's things. And Robert carried no wallet. He had no ID, but all he had was a small notebook with only pages and pages of names, nothing else. No phone numbers, no addresses, just names. And there's hundreds of them. And his clothes were a little odd too, no labels of any kind. And he only had what he was wearing. Something else, and I kind of alluded to it in the beginning, was he was extremely polite and very worldly, very well-mannered, and very articulate, which I just couldn't even spit that word out, which is such good timing. That was good timing from the universe. And these kids said that, and all of them agreed, even all of Nick's friends said that he spoke in a way that made him seem just much, much older than he claimed to be. He claimed to be 19 or 20, just like they were. And yes, they were underage drinking. I guess that's, what spring break is for. So also, another little side note here, Nick does not remember Robert ever eating or drinking a thing. Not at all. Not for the days and days that they were with him. He didn't eat or drink a thing. And Nick says to this day, he still thinks about Robert. And, in touching base later with the female that came up to him on the beach, something Robert said that sticks out was, and this was said to the female, Robert said, "I can't believe you've not met someone like me before." So, I mean, that is the culmination of the story. It's a quick story, but there's a lot of interesting bullet points. And I was kind of waiting for Nick to go, "Yeah, he sparkled a little in the sun,"
Yeah.
But those darn sparkly vampires. But Nick admits that at one point, Robert did bring up the subject of vampires, and vampires are supposed to be just timeless and ageless and all of these things. And all you have to do is read the wonderful Anne Rice to find out things like that, or watch Interview with the Vampire. So the EVP that I mentioned, that is actually pretty stunning. And not everybody agrees on it, but most people do. And I did not prompt this, but several people wrote in, and that was the time marker I was telling you about. And there is a whisper, and again, I believe it's And I actually created a separate EVP for it. If you wanted to put it in show notes, I can email you that,
please do.
you guys. But
Okay.
yeah, there's a whisper between Nick speaking and me speaking. And I swear it says vampires, just
Oh
like
my
that.
goodness.
And then I start to speak, and then there's all this blah, 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 blah. And then it's so hard to, to decipher. And it could be just suggestive because of the fact that you know what? Oh, here's what else is very strange about that. Right around the time when we are talking about the fact that Robert brought up vampires himself is when that EVP happened. So I don't know. I mean, it could be a coincidence, of course, but it was, at the very least strange.
That is strange. So it could have been possibly that whatever Robert is, or his spirit or whatever, could be wherever this kid is, and he could just, whisper the vampires through the EVP, or maybe let's say this kid has got other spirits around him and they know what he's thinking, so they say vampires, like in between that.
Yeah, and I have not caught a lot of stuff like that on my show. And again, it could totally be a coincidence and not tied in at all, but it was just really strange timing. And it was several people, before I had said, "Hey, do you guys," it wasn't like I announced on the next show, "Hey, do you hear anything weird at this point?" And then, people wrote in. It was just people of their own volition, without I hadn't even known about it yet, writing in and going, "Hey, I think I hear the word vampires in your show." So that was kind of cool to me. I don't know. Have you guys had any experiences like that where you're recording your show and then, you have some kind of an interaction like that where you're kind of questioning it?
I never listened to mine. I sent it to Dean and then he goes through it. But there's a couple of times I'll listen, and I heard something one time to Dean, but we couldn't figure out what it was. I have to remember which episode that was.
It's so hard to remember all the numbers, isn't it? Like if I don't have them written down, everyone's like, "Hey, which episode was Robert?" Like if I didn't have it written down, I would not know the numbers. But what's also really cool is that, so obviously all of us want high audio quality for our shows, right?
Yes.
So the cool thing is also that was found after, in Audacity, like noise removal and all this other stuff. So that
Right.
was pretty cool that bled through. I don't know.
Yeah. That's pretty neat.
Kind of a cool vindication for Robert. And I've always put the call out. I'm like,
Sure.
"Robert, if you're out there, you ever want to come on the show, buddy? Let's do this thing. You want to talk about who you are and what you are? Let's do it." No call from Robert yet.
Yeah. I do have a question though. Have you ever heard of these tall, white, skinny beings that seem to live near wooded areas? They're supposed to be like really, really ancient, and they're elementals. Have you ever gotten a story about those?
So there is one that I cover in Paramalgamation that, for lack of a better term, she calls it a wendigo. But
Gotcha.
I mean, really, we don't know what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was essentially, she's on a drive and she sees it off the side of the road. She thought it was like farm equipment at first, but she gets up closer and it's hunched over, like it's sitting on its bum with its arms around its knees. And she can tell by how far up the knees come. Like this thing would be like 8 feet tall if it stood up. And it was completely no clothes, no hair except for like on top of its head, all white, like you said. Just something straight out of, like a Hellraiser movie or something. She's terrified. She passes it. She's just wanting to get to work and forget about this horrible sighting. This is like way early. She has like an hour and a half drive. It was like 4 a.m. It was very dark.
Yeah.
Sees it again. But now it's in the middle of the road, except it's like crouched, like in a pouncing kind of a crouch. And she has to like swerve to go around it. Like it's a really dramatic and terrifying thing that she went through with that. But yeah, I mean, is that an elemental or something, quote unquote, of the earth? Or is it this, someone taking this dark vow of spiritualism and turning into something else, but for lack of a better term, she called it a wendigo. But somebody did a rendition of that. People that are very adept at drawing, which I am not. I can't even do a stick figure right. But they did a drawing of what she saw. And she's like, "Oh, yeah, that's what it is." And that changed her life. And she actually changed her job because of what she saw.
Oh, she didn't want to go past the same area?
Yeah, and actually she she got emotional when she was telling me that. So that's
Well,
one of the
yeah.
times when I know that it's cathartic for people to tell their stories, but also I feel really bad when that happens because I know that she had basically only told her husband, I think, at that point, and then she's telling me, and she's upset and reliving it. And then I'm like, first of all, thank you for coming on, of course. But man, you're so brave. Like, thank you for doing that because it's really important. People have to understand, yeah, there's a lot of stories out there, but every single one, if you put out your story, it may help somebody. Just one little tiny detail in your story may spark something in someone else and go, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I have going on. That, like, it may even be something that's darn near terrorizing them. And, if we can put them in touch or you can help them somehow, or even if they just know someone else is out there that has that experience, that is very helpful for people. And that's really the only reason that I do the show. I collect the stories. I'm not there to judge. I'm not there to vet. I just want to get their stories out there. And yeah, that's why I do the show.
I like that in Beyond the Fray Paramalgamation as well, you actually talk about that a little towards the end. You mention that when somebody has this type of experience, it can be this profound and life-altering moment, either for better or for worse. And I think too often when people just collect stories, they don't look at the psychological ramifications that happen when somebody has an encounter with something which just crashes into their reality and changes everything.
Yeah, and you got to keep it about the people too, and how it changed their mental state. Do they even sleep anymore? Have they changed rooms? I mean, if they tried to move houses because of this. I mean, we've all heard stories of that. And for me, and I don't mean to keep going back to my story, but it's just, you talk about how it changes people. Like I didn't talk about mine for so long because I told my dad about what I saw right afterward, and he's like, oh, well, I mean, they do military exercise. He's a ex-military guy, a veteran. So he's like, oh, they do military exercises up here all the time. That's not what you saw. I'm like, no, Dad. I'm 12. I'm like, no, Dad. Like, you don't understand. They were so, like, it was blacker than black. Like, the light wasn't even, it was middle of the day. The light, it wasn't touching them. You don't understand. You can't impart that, though. It's impossible. And I get it. I totally get it. And to this day, my dad's like, I still don't believe you saw those things in the woods, but that's okay. That's part of it, because it's all about finding. And yeah, like you said, Dean, in the beginning, and it's real poignant, especially nowadays. You can go to the paranormal community, the Bigfoot community, the UFO community, quote unquote community, because a lot of times it's real broken and there's a lot of infighting. But at the same time, there is a lot of, not to sound all namby-pamby, but there is a lot of healing that goes on too, because it is a small group of people, and you can find a lot of solace there, and you can find people that, okay, well, here's the shadow people, folks, and they've seen some weird stuff out there. And there's other kinds of shadow beings that are like 15 feet tall that people have seen. Thank goodness mine weren't looking like that, because that to me is also on the no list. Very strange. But mine were. If a shadow person could be more normal, that's what mine were. But I just think it's really important to keep sharing the stories and to encourage people to come forward and say, hey, it's okay that you got all this stuff going on in your life. Like, there are other people out there going through the same thing.
Yes. Yes. It's very, very helpful. Was that your only experience with a shadow person, or?
Yeah.
Is that what you said? Only? Okay.
Yep. At 12, I saw there was 4 of them, and they didn't interact with me, which I always say if they had, it probably would have been a different experience for me, maybe a little more terrifying. But I just saw them just running in the woods for about 5 seconds. I was riding on a 4-wheeler, and they were keeping pace with me off in the woods.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So it was, I mean, it's really cool. When I look back on it, I'm like, that was so cool to see. But why only the one time,
Yeah.
I mean, some
true.
people, and like I said, like you said you go out to other locations to to do these investigations.
Yeah.
And it's so different to be, okay, well, this hospital's haunted or this graveyard is haunted. We're going to go out there. get our EVPs and it's going to be cool. But then you go home
Mhm.
and nothing goes on. You can sleep because it was over there at the
Right,
hospital or the
yeah.
graveyard. But when it's in your own
Yeah.
house, I don't envy
Yeah.
those people at all. As much as I love this stuff, I mean, sure, if I wanted to break out the Ouija board and be like, screw it, let's just see what comes through. Nah, I mean, it's your own
Yeah.
house. You shouldn't, you got to be careful with that stuff. You really
Yeah.
do, because there is stuff out there just wanting to touch
Mhm.
base with you, give you a little high five, and then they may not leave.
Yeah. You got to learn how to protect yourself.
One final question, Shannon. How has it changed you talking to people who have these kind of experiences week in and week out?
Oh my gosh. That's a really good question. No one's ever asked me that before. I don't even know how to put that into words. Honestly, it has fortified my belief in really in people, not even in the experiences themselves. I mean, that is part of it, but just in people and their resilience and their drive to just find out what is behind this stuff. And it doesn't even have to be that they want to write a book about it or they want to find out, well, maybe Keel is right. Maybe they're all ultra terrestrials and it's all connected. Like, it doesn't even have to be that deep,
Yeah.
and it's cool if they go that far, but it's just, even after the recording button is off and someone goes, oh, I was really nervous at the beginning, but I feel really good after having talked to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I can't even tell you, I can't even impart on anybody, but you guys know, I know you guys do. I can't even impart on you how incredible that feels. And that probably sounds really selfish, but I don't even remember when the first time I told my story, to be honest with you. Well, it was probably on Sasquatch Chronicles, but I remember that feeling. And the experience changes you, but guess what? There's another experience after you tell it the first few times, because you're going to be like, your throat is dry and you got to take pauses.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, it's the people side of it. It really is. That's what's so cool about doing the show week in and week out, is I love hearing the stories. Fascinating. And
Mhm.
compiling that is very important. It really, really is. But it's the people side of it that I love.
It was an incredible joy to talk to you, Shannon. I was serious at the beginning of the show when I said you've been a guest we literally talked about having on since before we even pressed record on our first episode.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you guys so much. That means a whole lot. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed getting a chance to chat with Shannon. She is such a joy to talk to, and I cannot wait till next time. Shannon's book, Beyond the Fray, Paramalgamation, is available from Amazon.com. Autographed copies are available from Shannon's official website, intothefray.com. Of course, you can always find us at talkingweird.com. Or you can visit our new Fortean Hub site, charlesfort.org. There, you can find not only the full Talking Weird episode archive, but my new web series, Haunted Jenn, and Dean's show, Fort Thought. There's also loads of other Fortean goodness, including a t-shirt store with over 25 incredible and original UFO, cryptid, and paranormal-themed t-shirt designs, available in both women's and men's sizes. If you haven't already, please like Talking Weird on Facebook and Instagram at Talking Weird Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to the podcast. We're available on most podcast platforms and YouTube. Next week, make sure to join us as we chat with filmmaker Aaron Daniel Annis about his fantastic new paranormal documentary, There's No Such Thing as Ghosts. Until then, stay safe and keep it weird.